A chair scraped across the floor, and every head in the diner turned. The sound cut through the low hum of conversation like a blade. Forks paused midair. Coffee cups stopped halfway to lips. Even the crackling radio behind the counter seemed to drop a note lower. But it wasn't the chair that made people look. It was the man who stood beside it. Ruby's Diner sat on a two-lane highway outside Barstow, California, the kind of place truckers stopped at because nothing else was open past 9. Faded vinyl booths lined the windows. A counter ran the length of the kitchen with 12 stools, 3 of them cracked straight down the middle. The jukebox in the corner hadn't played a song since 1997, but nobody had the heart to haul it out, so it just sat there collecting dust and cigarette ash. The diner didn't attract crowds. It attracted people who didn't want to be around crowds. And on Thursday nights, it attracted Hank Bowen. He stood 6'3" and weighed somewhere north of 260 pounds. Most of that weight sat in his shoulders and chest, the kind of mass that came from years of hard living and harder choices. His arms were sleeved in ink from wrist to shoulder. Old prison tattoos mixed with newer ones, symbols that meant something to people who understood the language. A leather vest stretched tight across his back patches, sewn into the fabric like medals from a war most people didn't know was still being fought. The scar was what people noticed first. It ran from his left ear down to his collarbone, thick and white, like someone had tried to open him up with a broken bottle and hadn't quite finished the job. His hands looked like they'd been carved from stone and left in the rain to weather. Knuckles flat from decades of use. Fingers that had wrapped around throats and handlebars and prison bars in the small hand of a daughter who wasn't there anymore. When Hank Bowen walked into a room, the room got smaller. People moved. People looked away. People found somewhere else to be. But tonight, Hank wasn't walking anywhere. He was standing beside his usual booth in the back corner, and he wasn't alone. 2 plates sat on the table in front of him. One had been touched. Half a burger gone fries picked at a smear of ketchup across the edge. The other plate sat directly across from the first untouched. A grilled cheese sandwich with sliced tomato golden brown on the outside, cheese still melted and soft. Steam curled off the bread in thin ribbons. It looked like someone had just set it down, like someone was about to take the first bite. But there was no one sitting in that seat. There hadn't been anyone sitting in that seat for 3 years. Hank reached across the table and picked up the untouched plate. He held it in both hands for a moment, looking down at the food like he was memorizing it. Then he turned and walked toward the counter. The waitress, a woman named Della, who'd worked at Ruby's for 11 years, watched him approach. She didn't ask any questions. She learned a long time ago that some things didn't need explaining. Hank set the plate on the counter without a word. Della took it without a word. She scraped the grilled cheese into the trash, rinsed the plate, and set it in the dish rack to dry. The same routine they'd followed every Thursday night for the past 3 years. Every week, Hank ordered 2 plates. Every week, the second one went untouched. Every week, it ended up in the trash. Della had asked about it once, only once. She'd been working the Thursday shift about 2 months into Hank's routine, and curiosity had gotten the better of her professional distance. She walked over to his booth with a coffee pot in hand, refilled his cup, and tried to make it sound casual. "Who's the second plate for?" Hank had looked up at her. He didn't say a word, didn't threaten, didn't snarl, didn't do anything except look at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. Della never asked again. The truth was, the second plate was for Hank's daughter. Her name was Bryn. She'd been 14 years old the last time Hank sat across from her at a table. That was 6 years ago. 6 years, 2 months, and 17 days, if anyone was counting. Hank was counting. Bryn's mother, Jennifer, had taken her during the divorce and moved to Oregon. No forwarding address, no phone number, no response to the letters Hank sent through his lawyer, the ones that came back marked "Return to Sender," or simply disappeared into whatever black hole Jennifer had built around their daughter. Just silence. The kind of silence that gets louder the longer it lasts. Hank had tried everything he could think of. He had called attorneys in 3 states. He'd asked old contacts for help, people who owed him favors from back when favors still meant something. He'd driven up the Pacific coast twice, checking motels and diners and schools and laundromats, anywhere a woman and a teenage girl might land and try to build a new life. Nothing. Bryn was gone. Not dead, just gone. And Hank had never learned how to grieve someone who was still breathing somewhere. For the first 3 years after she disappeared, he'd fought it. Kept calling lawyers, kept sending letters, kept driving north every few months with the desperate hope that maybe this time he'd walk into some diner in Portland or Eugene, and there she'd be sitting at a booth with her homework spread out in front of her, and she'd look up and see him, and everything would somehow be okay, but it never was. The calls led nowhere. The letters went unanswered. The drives ended with him sitting alone in motel parking lots at 3 in the morning, staring at his phone and wondering what he'd even say if she picked up. 3 years of fighting turned into acceptance. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that settles in your chest like wet concrete and hardens there. So Hank started a new routine. Every Thursday night he came to Ruby's Diner. He sat in the same booth. He ordered the same 2 meals. One for himself, one for Bryn, grilled cheese with sliced tomato, the way she used to like it when she was small, before everything got complicated, before the divorce, before the silence. He never explained it. He never looked at the second plate while he ate. He never offered it to anyone who walked past. It just sat there across from him, untouched until closing time. It was the only way he knew how to keep her in his life. The second plate was loneliness with a schedule. People in the diner gave Hank a wide berth. Not because he'd ever threatened anyone inside Ruby's. He hadn't. He paid his tab, left decent tips, and never caused trouble. But people could feel it on him the way you feel a storm rolling in before the first drop of rain falls. The vest, the patches, the scars, the sheer size of him, the way he took up space without apology. A young mother had come in once with 2 small children, took one look at Hank sitting in his booth, and asked Della if they could sit as far from him as possible. A trucker who'd accidentally brushed against Hank's table while squeezing past apologized 3 times in 5 seconds. Even the cook, a guy named Eddie, who'd done 8 years in Chino and wasn't afraid of much, avoided Hank's side of the diner when he bussed tables. Hank noticed all of it. Every glance that looked away too fast. Every conversation that got quieter when he walked past. Every parent who steered their kid toward the other side of the room. He noticed and he said nothing. What was there to say? He'd been wearing this skin for 20 years. He knew what it looked like from the outside, knew what people saw when they looked at him. A Hells Angels member, a man who'd done things that didn't get talked about at dinner tables, a man whose knuckles told stories his mouth never would. They saw the patches on his vest and made assumptions. Most of those assumptions were correct, but none of them knew about the second plate. None of them knew that the most dangerous-looking man in Barstow spent every Thursday night eating dinner with a ghost. Loneliness is a heavy thing when it becomes part of your schedule. You stop noticing the sting. You just carry the weight. Hank carried it the way he carried everything. Quietly, without asking anyone to help, because asking for help had never gotten him anywhere worth going. He'd learned that lesson early. Henderson, Nevada, 1974. Hank Bowen was 9 years old and he was learning what fear tasted like. It tasted like copper. Like blood in your mouth when you bite your tongue trying not to scream. Like the air in a house where someone's always about to snap and you're just waiting to find out who and when and how bad it's going to be this time. His father was a long-haul trucker who drank on his days off and used his fists when the drinking turned dark. Hank's mother took the worst of it. She was small, thin, the kind of woman who learned how to make herself invisible in a room, how to move without making sound, how to apologize for things that weren't her fault, just to keep the peace. She told Hank to go to his room when his father started drinking. Shut the door, turn up the radio, don't come out until morning. Hank did that for a long time. He'd lie on his bed with the radio playing loud enough to drown out the sounds from the other room. The shouting, the breaking glass, the heavy thud of something hitting the wall or the floor or his mother. He'd stare at the ceiling and count the cracks in the plaster and tell himself that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow his father would wake up sober and sorry, and everything would be okay. But tomorrow was never different. His younger brother, a kid named Danny, who was 6 years old and still believed that grown-ups knew what they were doing, would crawl into Hank's bed on the bad nights. He'd press his face into Hank's shoulder and cry quiet sobs that shook his whole body. Hank never cried. He'd learned early that crying didn't change anything. One night in August, when the heat made the air inside the house feel like it was crushing you, Hank's father came home from a 3-day haul and went straight for the whiskey. By 8 o'clock, he was stumbling. By 9, he was shouting. By 10, Hank heard his mother scream. It wasn't the first time, but something about that scream was different. Hank sat up in bed. Danny was already awake, curled into a ball against the wall with his hands over his ears. The radio was playing some song Hank couldn't hear over the pounding in his chest. Another scream, then the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then silence. Hank stood up. He walked to his closet and pulled out the backpack he used for school. He started packing. Clothes, a flashlight, the $23 he'd saved from mowing lawns, a pocket knife his grandfather had given him before he died. Danny watched from the bed, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "We're leaving," Hank said. He didn't ask if Danny wanted to come. He just held out his hand and Danny took it. They climbed out the bedroom window and walked into the Nevada desert. It was after midnight. The air had cooled down, but not by much. The sky was so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. Hank had no plan beyond getting as far from that house as possible. He held Danny's hand and walked toward the distant glow of the highway, thinking maybe they could hitch a ride to Las Vegas or California or anywhere that wasn't Henderson. They made it about 4 miles. Danny was crying by then. Not loud, just steady tears running down his face. His feet hurt. He was tired. He kept asking Hank where they were going, and Hank kept saying somewhere safe, even though he had no idea what that meant or where it was. They stopped under an overpass to rest. That's where the highway patrol found them. 2 officers in a cruiser spotlight sweeping across the sand until it landed on 2 boys sitting against a concrete pylon. One of them crying, the other staring straight ahead with eyes that looked too old for his face. The officers asked questions. Hank didn't answer most of them. They put the boys in the back of the cruiser and drove them home. Hank's father didn't even look at them when they walked in the door. His mother was in this kitchen, standing at the sink with a dish towel pressed against her face. When she lowered it, Hank saw the bruise spreading across her cheekbone, dark purple and swelling. She didn't ask where they'd been. She just told them to go to bed. Nothing changed. Nothing ever changed. His mother kept taking the hits. Danny kept hiding in the closet on bad nights. And Hank kept turning up the radio louder and louder until one day the music couldn't cover the sounds anymore. Hank was 16 when he left for good. Old enough to walk out the door and not get dragged back by highway patrol. Old enough to lie about his age and get work on construction sites. Old enough to realize that his mother was never going to leave and there was nothing he could do to save her. Danny stayed behind. Hank told himself he'd come back for his brother once he got settled somewhere. Once he had a real job, a real place to live, some kind of foundation to offer. But by the time Hank was 22 and had found that foundation in the Hells Angels, by the time he'd built a life that made sense in its own violent way, Danny was already gone. Overdose. Fentanyl-laced heroin, 23 years old. Hank got the call from a number he didn't recognize. A social worker in Reno. She was very sorry for his loss. Did he want to claim the body? Did he want to arrange a service? Hank hung up without answering. He never went to the funeral, never saw where they buried Danny, never spoke his brother's name out loud again. Because the truth was, Hank had run. He'd saved himself and left Danny behind, and all the leather and ink and patches in the world couldn't change that. The Hells Angels gave Hank something his family never had: structure, loyalty, a code that made sense. Brothers who had your back not because they were supposed to, but because they chose to. But they couldn't give him back the people he'd lost. Not Danny and not Bryn. Hank sat in his booth at Ruby's Diner, staring at the empty seat across from him, and he knew exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at a pattern. He was looking at a lifetime of running from things he should have fought for and fighting for things that didn't matter. He'd run from his father's house and lost his brother. He'd fought Jennifer in court and lost his daughter. And now he was 54 years old, sitting alone in a diner ordering food for someone who wasn't coming. The clock on the wall showed 8:50. Hank had eaten about half his burger. The second plate sat untouched across from him, steam still curling off the bread. The diner was nearly empty. Just Hank in his booth, an older man at the counter reading a folded newspaper, and Della wiping down the coffee machine behind the register. Thursday nights were always slow. Hank liked it that way. Then the front door opened. Two kids walked in. The bell above the door chimed that bright little sound that announced at every arrival. Hank didn't look up at first. People came and went. It wasn't his business. But something made him look. Maybe it was the way the door opened. Slow, careful. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be coming in at all. Or maybe it was the silence that followed. No adult voice asking for a table. No conversation. Just the sound of two sets of feet on the old linoleum floor. Hank looked up. A boy and a girl stood just inside the doorway. The boy looked about 10, maybe 11. Hard to tell with kids these days. He was thin, the kind of thin that comes from skipped meals, not genetics. His hair needed cutting. His clothes were dirty. Not the kind of dirty that comes from playing outside for an afternoon. The kind that comes from wearing the same thing for days, maybe a week. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, half-zipped, stuffed unevenly like it had been packed in a hurry by someone who didn't know what they'd need. The girl was younger, 7, maybe 8. She stood a half step behind the boy with her hand gripped tight in his. Her eyes were wide, scanning the room with the kind of alertness you see in animals that know they're being hunted. She wasn't wearing socks. Hank saw that first. Her shoes were two big, dirty white sneakers with the laces tied wrong, and when she took a step forward, he could see her bare ankles above the edge. The boy's sneakers had a hole near the toe. They stood just inside the door, not moving, taking in the diner the way people take in open ground when they're not sure it's safe to cross. Della looked up from the coffee machine. She started to smile, the automatic customer service smile, but it faded when she got a good look at them. The older man at the counter, a guy named Vernon Price who came in most nights to read his paper and drink coffee until his wife stopped being mad at him, glanced over his shoulder. He took one look at the kids and frowned. Hank watched them from his booth. The boy's eyes moved slowly across the room, past Della, past Vernon, past the empty booths in the jukebox and the faded posters on the wall. They landed on Hank. More specifically, they landed on the two plates in front of him. On the food. The boy swallowed. Hank saw his throat move, saw the way his hand tightened around his sister's. Then the boy took a step forward. The girl moved with him, still half hidden behind his back, using him as a shield between herself and the rest of the world. They walked across the diner, slow, deliberate, like they were crossing a frozen lake and testing every step to make sure the ice would hold. Hank set his burger down. The boy stopped at the edge of his booth, close enough to talk, far enough to run if he needed to. Up close, Hank could see more. The dirt under the boy's fingernails, the way his hands shook, even though he was trying to hold them still. The girl pressed against his back with one eye peeking out from behind his arm, watching Hank like he might explode at any second. The boy looked up at Hank. And here's the thing. Imagine being 10 years old and hungry enough that your hands won't stop shaking. Imagine looking across a diner and seeing the biggest, most dangerous-looking man you've ever encountered in your life. Leather, ink, scars, a face that looks like it was built to frighten people. And imagine walking up to that man and opening your mouth to ask for something. That takes something most grown adults don't have. The boy's voice came out thin and careful. "Excuse me, sir." Hank didn't move. His fork was still in his hand, his eyes locked on the boy's face. The diner went silent. Della froze mid-wipe. Vernon lowered his newspaper an inch. Even the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter seemed to drop away. The boy swallowed again. He pointed at the second plate, the untouched grilled cheese. "May we have your leftovers?" 4 words. That's all it took to crack something open in Hank Bowen's chest that had been sealed shut for 6 years. He looked at the boy, then he looked at the girl behind him, one eye still peeking out from behind her brother's arm. He looked at their clothes, their hands, their shoes, the hole near the boy's toe, the girl's bare ankles. He looked at the backpack half zipped and stuffed wrong. He looked at the way the boy stood, rigid, ready to run, but standing his ground anyway because his sister was hungry and he was the only one who could do anything about it. And Hank saw himself. 45 years ago, standing in a house in Henderson with a backpack in his hand and a brother who needed him and no idea what to do except run. The same shaking hands, the same rigid spine, the same eyes that said, "I'm not scared of you, but I am scared of everything behind me." Hank picked up the untouched plate. He held it out toward the boy. The boy reached for it with both hands, moving slowly like he was afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. But before he could take it, Hank pulled it back. Not hard, not cruel, just enough to make the boy look him in the eye again. "Sit down," Hank said. The boy froze. "Both of you, sit down." For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the boy slid into the booth across from Hank, pulling his sister in beside him. They moved carefully like they were sitting on something fragile. The girl kept her hands folded in her lap. The boy kept his eyes fixed on the plate. Hank pushed the grilled cheese across the table toward them. Then he raised one hand and called Della over. She came coffee pot in hand, looking between Hank and the kids like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "2 more plates," Hank said. "Whatever they want. 2 glasses of milk." Della looked at him. She looked at the kids. She opened her mouth like she might ask a question, then closed it again. She just nodded and walked to the kitchen window. The girl reached for the grilled cheese first. She ate it with both hands, gripping it tight, like someone might try to take it away. She didn't eat fast. She ate steady. The way someone eats when they haven't had a full meal since yesterday and they're trying to make every bite count. The boy watched her for a moment, making sure she had enough before he took a bite himself. Neither of them spoke. Hank didn't speak either. He sat there watching them eat, his hands flat on the table, his jaw loose for the first time all night. When Della brought 2 hamburger plates with fries, the girl's eyes went wide. She looked at Hank like she was asking permission. He gave one small nod. She pulled the plate toward her and went for the fries, first picking them up one at a time with her small fingers, eating each one like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. For about 10 minutes, the diner was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not tense quiet, a different kind. Vernon Price had turned around on his stool to watch. Della leaned against the register with her arms crossed, the smallest smile on her face. Something in the room had shifted. Something you could feel, but couldn't name. The boy ate slowly, deliberately, like he was trying to make the food last because he didn't know when the next meal was coming. The girl ate the opposite way. She went through those fries like she was afraid someone was going to take the plate away before she finished. Hank noticed that too. He'd seen it before. Kids who eat like that aren't just us hungry. They've been hungry long enough that food doesn't feel safe. It feels temporary. Hank flagged Della down one more time. "Bring them pie," he said, "whatever kind you've got." Della came back with the 2 slices of cherry pie. And when she set them down, the girl looked up at her with this expression, this mix of confusion and gratitude that made Della press her lips together hard and walk away fast. It looked like a simple moment, a biker buying dinner for 2 hungry kids, the kind of thing people share online for a day and forget by the next morning. A warm story, a nice ending. But it wasn't the ending, not even close. Vernon Price folded his newspaper. He stood up from his stool and walked toward the booth, stopping about 3 feet away. He looked down at the 2 kids with an expression that was part recognition, part alarm. Those are the Brennan kids, he said. He wasn't talking to Hank. He was talking to Della, but his voice carried across the quiet diner. I saw the flyer at the station this morning. Sarah Brennan's children. They've been missing since Tuesday. The girl stopped chewing. The boy set his hamburger down, and the little girl started to cry. Quiet, shaking sobs she tried to push into her brother's sleeve. Hank looked at Vernon, then he looked at the kids. The boy had gone rigid, not scared the way he'd been at the door, a different kind of scared, deeper, the kind that comes from being found. Missing from where? Hank asked. Vernon shrugged. Their mother's boyfriend reported it, said they ran off Monday night. There's a number on the flyer for the sheriff's office. Hank didn't reach for his phone. He didn't look at Della. He looked straight at the boy. What's your name? The boy's mouth went tight. He didn't answer. I'm not calling anyone, Hank said. His voice was low, steady. Not yet. I just need to understand what's happening here. What's your name? A long, heavy pause. The girl was still crying into her brother's arm. The boy's hands were pressed flat on the table just like Hank's had been a moment ago. Wyatt, he said finally. His voice was barely there. She's Ivy. Hank nodded once. Why did you leave home, Wyatt? Wyatt looked down at the table. When he spoke, his voice was barely there. Because he hits her. 3 words. That's all it took to change every single thing about the story. Hank's hands stayed flat on the table. His expression didn't shift. But something behind his eyes moved. Something old. Something deep. Something very, very steady. He hits your sister, Hank asked. Wyatt shook his head. My mom. The diner had been quiet before. Now it was silent in a way that made the air feel heavy. Vernon Price stood frozen 3 feet from the booth. Della had stopped moving entirely behind the register. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. Hank leaned back against the vinyl seat. He looked at Wyatt the way a man looks at a mirror showing him a face from 45 years ago. He knew this story, not because someone had told it to him, because he'd lived it. Different name, different town, different decade. Same story. A kid with a backpack. A kid protecting someone smaller. A kid who'd decided that leaving was safer than staying. Hank had been that kid. He was 9 years old when he walked out the back door of his family's house in Henderson, Nevada, with his little brother's hand in his, and a backpack full of things that didn't matter. He thought he was saving them. Thought if they just got far enough away, everything would be different. But 4 miles into the desert, sitting under an overpass with Danny crying into his shoulder, Hank had learned something that would follow him for the rest of his life. Running doesn't save anyone. It just moves the pain somewhere else. The highway patrol had found them before sunrise, driven them home, dropped them off like lost dogs returned to their owner. And nothing changed. Nothing ever changed. His mother kept taking the hits. Danny kept hiding in closets. And Hank kept lying in bed with the radio turned up loud enough to drown out the sounds that came through the walls. He was 16 when he left for good. 22 when he joined the Hells Angels. 29 when he got the call about Danny. Overdose, fentanyl, dead at 23. Hank had run and Danny had stayed, and neither choice had saved anyone. Now he was sitting across from a 10-year-old boy who'd made the same choice Hank had made at 9, who'd packed a bag and grabbed his sister and walked out into the night because staying meant watching someone he loved get hurt, and he couldn't do that anymore. The difference was this time someone was sitting across the table. This time the kid wasn't alone. Hank's jaw tightened. How long's it been going on? He asked. Wyatt didn't look up. 6 months, maybe longer, I don't know. It got worse after he moved in. The boyfriend, Wyatt nodded. What's his name? Travis. Travis Cole. Hank filed that away. A name. Something concrete. Something that could be dealt with. He hit you, Hank asked. No, just Mom. And he... Wyatt's voice caught. He yells at Ivy, makes her cry, tells her she's stupid, tells her she's the reason everything's wrong. Ivy had stopped crying, but she was still pressed against her brother's side, her face buried in his sleeve. She hadn't looked at Hank since Vernon mentioned the sheriff. "Where were you headed?" Hank asked. Wyatt shrugged. "My grandma lives in Needles, but I don't know her address. I don't know her phone number. I thought if we could get there, maybe she'd help." "How far'd you get?" "We walked from Victorville, got a ride from a trucker to Barstow. He dropped us at the gas station. We've been walking since then." Hank did the math in his head. Victorville to Barstow was close to 40 miles. These kids had been on the move for at least 2 days, maybe 3, sleeping where they could, eating whatever they could find or beg. And the whole time their mother's boyfriend had reported them missing, which meant he was looking for them. Or someone was. Hank kept his voice level. "You've been eating, Some," Wyatt said. "Lady at a McDonald's gave us fries yesterday. We found some stuff in a dumpster behind a grocery store." Ivy lifted her head just enough to whisper something into Wyatt's ear. Wyatt listened, then spoke for her. "She says we shared a candy bar this morning. Found it on the ground near a bus stop." Hank felt something tighten in his chest. These kids had been eating garbage and found candy bars, and the first real meal they'd had in God knows how long was leftovers they'd asked a stranger for in a diner. And they'd asked him, of all the people in Barstow, they'd walked up to the one man most people crossed the street to avoid. Hank looked at Wyatt's hands on the table. They were still shaking. Not from fear now, from exhaustion. From days of adrenaline and not enough food and the weight of keeping his sister safe when he was just a kid himself. Hank saw his own hands at 9 years old, holding Danny's hand in the desert, shaking just like that. "You did good," Hank said quietly. Wyatt looked up confused. "Getting her out," Hank said. "Keeping her safe. That took guts, more than most grown men have." Wyatt's chin started to tremble. He looked away fast, blinking hard. Hank gave him a moment, let the kid have his dignity. Then he pulled his phone out of his vest pocket. Wyatt's eyes went wide. "You said you weren't calling anyone." "I'm not calling the cops," Hank said. "I'm calling someone who can help." "Who?" Hank didn't answer. He was already scrolling through his contacts past names he hadn't called in years, past numbers attached to people who were dead or in prison or both. He stopped on a name. Flint, Raymond Flint Carver. Hell's Angels. San Bernardino chapter. A man Hank had ridden with for 15 years before things got complicated, and Hank stepped back from the club. Not out, just back. Far enough to keep breathing room. Close enough that when he needed something, he could still make a call. Flint owed Hank. More than once, Hank had kept Flint's name out of places it didn't need to be. Had taken hits that should have landed on Flint. Had kept his mouth shut in rooms where talking would have been easier. Now Hank needed something back. The phone rang 3 times. A rough voice answered. "Hank, been a while." "Need a favor," Hank said. "Talk to me." "Got 2 kids here. Domestic situation. They ran. I need a safe place for them tonight. Somewhere off the books. Can you make calls?" There was a pause. Hank could hear voices in the background. Music, the clatter of pool balls. Flint was at the clubhouse. "How old?" Flint asked. 10 and 7. Another pause. "Give me 30 minutes, Flint said. "I'll call you back." "Thanks. Don't thank me yet. Just keep 'em safe till I sort this out." Flint hung up. Hank set his phone on the table. He looked at Wyatt. "Who was that?" Wyatt asked. His voice was tight, caught between hope and terror. "Someone who owes me," Hank said. "Nobody's sending you back tonight. You hear me?" Wyatt nodded, but his eyes were still, wide, still uncertain. Hank understood. The kid had no reason to trust anyone. Adults had failed him. The system had failed him. His own mother's choices had put him in a position where running was the safest option. Trust wasn't something you handed out to strangers in diners. Trust was something you earned. "I ran once too," Hank said. Wyatt looked at him. Hank hadn't planned to say it, hadn't planned to share anything. But sitting across from this kid, seeing himself reflected back in a pair of 10-year-old eyes, he realized that maybe the only thing worth giving right now was the truth. I was 9, Hank continued, about your age. My old man was a mean drunk. Used to knock my mom around when he got into the bottle. I tried to stop it once, got between them. He threw me through a screen door. Wyatt's eyes didn't leave Hank's face. One night it got real bad, Hank said. Worse than usual. I heard my mom screaming and I couldn't take it anymore. So I packed a bag, grabbed my little brother. We walked out into the desert thinking we'd make it to Las Vegas or somewhere safe. What happened? Wyatt asked. Highway Patrol found us about 4 miles out, brought us back home. Hank's voice was flat, factual. Nothing changed. My mom stayed, my brother stayed. I stayed for a while. Then I left when I was old enough. But my brother, he stopped. My brother didn't make it. Died when he was 23. Drugs. I always wondered if things would have been different if I'd stayed, or if I'd gotten him out, or if I'd just known how to do it right. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. You think I did it wrong? He asked. His voice was small. No, Hank said immediately. You did the only thing you could do. You got your sister out. That's more than I managed. But they're going to send us back. Not if I have anything to say about it. Ivy lifted her head from Wyatt's sleeve. She looked at Hank for the first time since Vernon had mentioned the sheriff. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. A flicker of something that might have been hope. Are you going to keep us safe? She asked. Her voice was so quiet, Hank almost didn't hear it. Yeah, Hank said, I am. It was a promise he had no legal right to make, no authority to enforce. But he made it anyway because that little girl needed to hear it, and because Hank Bowen had spent the last 45 years wishing someone had made that same promise to him. Della walked over to the booth, moving slowly like she was approaching something fragile. You want me to lock the door? She asked Hank. He looked up at her. Yeah, turn the sign. Della nodded. She walked to the front door, flipped the deadbolt, and turned the open sign to closed. Then she dimmed the lights near the windows so anyone passing by would think they were shutting down for the night. Vernon Price was still standing near the booth, his newspaper folded under his arm. You want me to call the sheriff? He asked. No, Hank said. Those kids are reported missing. There's a legal obligation to... I said no. Vernon looked at Hank, looked at the kids, then he nodded slowly and walked back to the counter. But he didn't leave. He just sat down on a stool and picked up his coffee like he was settling in for a wait. The diner didn't feel like a diner anymore. It felt like something safer. Hank sat there across from Wyatt and Ivy, and for the first time in 6 years, the empty seat across from him wasn't empty. For the first time in 6 years, a second plate had been eaten. The 30 minutes waiting for Flint to call back felt longer than they were. Wyatt finished his burger. Ivy worked her way through the slice of cherry pie, taking small bites and savoring each one like she was trying to make it last forever. Nobody spoke much. Della brought fresh glasses of milk without being asked. Vernon read his newspaper, but Hank could tell he wasn't actually reading it. His eyes weren't moving. Hank's phone sat on the table between him and Wyatt like a ticking clock. At one point, Wyatt looked up at him. Why are you helping us? He asked. It was a fair question. Hank thought about how to answer it. He could have said something simple, something easy, because it's the right thing to do, because you needed help. But that wasn't the whole truth. Because I see myself in you, Hank said, and I see my brother in your sister, and I didn't save him. So maybe I can save you. Wyatt absorbed that. What happened to your daughter? Hank went still. Della had been wiping down tables nearby, and she froze mid-wipe. How'd you know I have a daughter? Hank asked. Wyatt pointed at the plate that had held the grilled cheese, the one Hank had offered them. That was for someone, Wyatt said. You ordered 2 plates and you were eating alone. So it was for someone who wasn't here. Smart kid. Her name's Bryn, Hank said. She's 20 now. Haven't seen her in 6 years. Why not? Her mother took her when she was 14. Moved to Oregon, cut off all contact. I tried to find them. Tried to get her back, but I didn't know how to fight the right way. Only way I knew was fists and lawyers and driving around looking for ghosts. Hank's voice was rough. Turns out that doesn't work. You can't force someone to love you, can't force them to come back. You think she hates you? Wyatt asked. I think her mother told her things about me. True things probably. About the kind of man I was. The club. The things I did. And I think those things scared her. Made her think I was dangerous. Are you? Wyatt asked. Dangerous, though. Hank looked at him. Yeah, he said, I am, but not to you. It was the most honest answer he could give. Wyatt seemed to accept it. He nodded slowly like he was filing that information away somewhere safe. The grilled cheese, Wyatt said. That's what she used to eat. When she was little, Hank said. Before everything got complicated, it was her favorite, grilled cheese with tomato. And you order it every week, every Thursday, 3 years now, but she's not coming back. Hank didn't answer right away. No, he said finally, she's not. So why do you keep ordering it? Hank had asked himself that same question 100 times. He still didn't have a good answer. Because it's the only way I know how to keep her in my life, he said. Even if she's not here, even if she never comes back. That plate it's a promise to myself that I'm not giving up, that I'm still her father even if she doesn't want me to be. Wyatt thought about that. That's sad, he said. Yeah, Hank agreed. It is. Ivy had been listening to the whole conversation without saying anything. Now she set down her fork and looked at Hank with those big, serious eyes. I think she'll come back, Ivy said. Hank's throat went tight. Why's that? He asked. Because you didn't give up, Ivy said simply. And people who don't give up always win eventually. It was the kind of thing a 7-year-old says because she still believes the world works that way. Because she hasn't learned yet that sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. That sometimes the people you love leave and they don't come back and there's nothing you can do about it except to order a grilled cheese sandwich every Thursday and hope it fills the hole. But Hank didn't tell her that. He just nodded and said, maybe you're right. Hank's phone buzzed. He picked it up. Flint's name on the screen. Yeah, Hank answered. Got it sorted, Flint said. My cousin Marianne, she's retired CPS. Knows how the system works. She's got a safe house cleared off the books. She'll take the kids tonight, get them settled. Tomorrow she'll start making calls, find the grandmother, get the legal stuff moving. She good people? Hank asked. She's the best. Spent 30 years getting kids out of bad situations. She knows what she's doing. How long till she gets here? 20 minutes. She's coming from Victorville. Tell her to come to Ruby's Diner on Route 58. We'll be waiting. Hank, Flint said. His voice dropped lower. You sure about this getting involved? I'm already involved. You know how this looks. Big scary biker taking in 2 missing kids. Cops get wind of this, they're gonna have questions. Let them ask. Just be careful, brother. Always am. Hank hung up. He looked at Wyatt. Someone's coming. Her name's Marianne. She used to be a social worker. She's going to take you somewhere safe tonight. Tomorrow she'll find your grandma. Wyatt's hands tightened on the edge of the table. What about our mom? What about her? Is she going to be okay? Hank didn't know how to answer that. He didn't know Sarah Brennan. Didn't know if she'd tried to leave Travis Cole before. Didn't know if she was the kind of woman who'd fight for her kids or the kind who'd choose the boyfriend over everything else. But he knew what Wyatt needed to hear. Marianne's going to make sure your mom's safe, Hank said, and she's going to make sure that guy can't hurt her anymore. How? By doing what should have been done a long time ago, getting the law involved, getting your mom help. What if she doesn't want help? It was the smartest, saddest question a 10-year-old could ask. Then at least you and Ivy will be safe, Hank said. And sometimes that's all you can do, save the ones you can save. Wyatt looked down at his plate. His burger was gone. His fries were gone. The only thing left was a smear of ketchup and some crumbs. I don't want to leave her, Wyatt said quietly. Even after everything, she's still my mom. Hank understood that too. He'd felt the same way about his own mother, even after watching his father use her as a punching bag for years, even after she chose to stay, even after she looked him in the eye when he was 16 and told him to leave because there was nothing he could do to help her. You don't stop loving someone just because they make bad choices. You just learn to love them from a distance. Your mom made her choices, Hank said. You made yours. You chose your sister. That's the right choice. And maybe someday your mom will make the right choice too. But that's on her, not you. Wyatt's eyes were wet, but he didn't cry. He just nodded. Della walked over with the coffee pot. She refilled Hank's cup even though he hadn't asked for it. Then she set the pot down and put her hand on Wyatt's shoulder. You're a brave kid, she said. Both of you. Ivy looked up at her and managed a small smile. Vernon Price stood up from the counter. He walked over to the booth and set a $20 bill on the table. For whatever they need, he said to Hank. Then he walked to the door, unlocked it, and left without another word. Hank picked up the 20 and handed it to Wyatt. For later, he said, when you need something. Wyatt took it carefully like it might disappear if he held it too tight. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Hank said. We're not done. The minutes crawled by. Hank sat in the booth with two kids who weren't his and felt something shift inside him. Something that had been locked down tight for 6 years, not opening exactly, just loosening, like a rusted bolt finally starting to turn. He'd spent 3 years ordering a plate for a daughter who wasn't coming. And tonight, for the first time, someone had actually sat down and eaten it. It wasn't Bryn, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the second plate was never really about Bryn. Maybe it was about Hank learning how to keep space for people. How to stay present even when the person you loved most in the world was gone. How to not give up on the idea that someday someone would sit across from you and you wouldn't be alone anymore. Wyatt and Ivy weren't his kids, but tonight they needed him. And maybe that was enough. Headlights swept across the diner windows. A car pulled into the parking lot. A Honda Civic, older model, clean but worn. The engine cut off and a woman got out. She was short, maybe 5'2", with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She wore jeans and a sweater and carried a large canvas bag over her shoulder. She moved with the kind of calm that only comes from decades of walking into bad situations and knowing exactly what to do. Della unlocked the door. The woman walked in and looked around. Her eyes found Hank first, then moved to the kids. You must be Wyatt and Ivy, she said. Her voice was gentle, kind, the voice of someone who had spent her whole career talking to frightened children. She walked to the booth, but she didn't sit down. She crouched beside the table so she was at eye level with the kids. My name's Marianne, she said. I'm a friend of Hank's, and I'm here to help. Ivy looked at her, then at Hank, then back at Marianne. Hank gave her a small nod. It's okay. Marianne set her canvas bag on the floor and pulled out 2 fleece blankets, a thermos of hot chocolate, and a small stuffed bear. She unscrewed the thermos, poured hot chocolate into the cap, and handed it to Ivy. Ivy took it with both hands and held it against her chest like it was alive. Marianne looked at Wyatt. Hank told me a little bit about what's been happening, but I need to hear it from you. Can you tell me why you left home? Wyatt glanced at Hank. Hank stayed quiet. This wasn't his story to tell. Wyatt took a breath and started talking. He told her about Travis Cole, about the yelling, about the hitting, about how their mom had changed since Travis moved in, how she used to smile and now she didn't, how she used to make them breakfast and now she barely got out of bed. He told her about the night they left, how Travis had been drinking, how he grabbed their mom by the hair and slammed her against the wall, how Wyatt had grabbed Ivy's hand and they'd slipped out the back door while Travis was still yelling. He told her about walking through Victorville in the dark, about the trucker who gave them a ride, about sleeping behind a gas station and eating out of dumpsters. Marianne listened to all of it without interrupting. She didn't take notes, didn't pull out a phone, Just listened with the kind of attention that made you feel like every word mattered. When Wyatt finished, Marianne nodded slowly. You did the right thing, she said, getting your sister out, keeping her safe. That took courage. Wyatt's chin started to tremble. Marianne reached out and put her hand over his. I'm going to help you. Both of you. Tonight you're coming home with me. I've got 2 beds ready, clean sheets, hot showers. Tomorrow we're going to find your grandmother, and we're going to make sure your mom gets help. What about Travis? Wyatt asked. Travis is going to have a very bad week, Marianne said. There was steel in her voice. I promise you that. She stood up and looked at Hank. Thank you for calling Flint, she said. Thank you for coming, Hank said. Marianne smiled. This is what I do, or what I used to do. Hard habit to break. She gathered up her bag and the blankets. You two ready? Wyatt slid out of the booth. Ivy followed, still holding the cup of hot chocolate. Before they walked to the door, Wyatt turned back to Hank. Will you be there? He asked. Tomorrow, when we see our grandma. Hank wanted to say yes, wanted to promise this kid that he'd be there every step of the way. But that wasn't his place. These weren't his kids. This wasn't his fight. He'd done what he could, made the call, kept them safe until help arrived. That was all anyone could ask. I'll make sure you're okay, Hank said. That's what matters. It wasn't the answer Wyatt wanted, but it was the truth. Wyatt nodded. He understood. Marianne put her hand on his shoulder and guided him toward the door. Ivy followed, still pressed close to her brother's side. At the door, Marianne stopped and looked back at Hank. You did good tonight, she said. Hank didn't respond. He just watched them walk out into the parking lot, get into the Honda, and drive away. The taillights disappeared into the darkness. Hank sat alone in the booth. Della walked over and started clearing the plates. She didn't say anything, just stacked them carefully and carried them to the kitchen. When she came back, she set the bill on the table. Hank pulled out his wallet and dropped 3 20s on top of it. Keep the change, he said. Della picked up the money. She looked at him for a long moment. You're a good man, Hank Bowen, she said softly. Hank shook his head. No, he said. I'm not. I lost my own kid because I didn't know how to fight the right way. Only way I knew was fists and bikes and running. Those kids tonight, maybe I can do it right this time. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. The first time he'd admitted that losing Bryn wasn't Jennifer's fault. It was his. He'd been too much biker and not enough dad. Too much leather and ink and anger. He'd scared Jennifer, scared Bryn. And when Jennifer took their daughter and ran, she was doing the same thing Wyatt had done tonight, getting someone she loved away from something dangerous. And Hank had been the dangerous thing. Della didn't argue with him. She just picked up the bill and the money and walked away. Hank sat in the empty booth for a while longer. The second plate was gone, scraped clean by a 7-year-old girl who'd been eating out of dumpsters for 3 days. For the first time in 3 years, the ritual was broken, and somehow that felt right. Hank stood up, his knees cracked, his back ached. He was 54 years old, and he felt every year of it. He walked to the door, stepped out into the night, and stood under the buzzing neon sign. The parking lot was empty except for his bike. A Harley, black and chrome, the same bike he'd been riding for 15 years. He straddled it and sat there for a moment with the engine off, looking back at the diner. Through the window, he could see Della wiping down tables, could see the booth where he'd sat every Thursday for 3 years, could see the empty seat across from where he always sat. He thought about Bryn, thought about Wyatt and Ivy, thought about Danny dead at 23, thought about the pattern of his whole life, running, fighting, losing. Maybe it was time to break the pattern. Hank started the engine. The Harley roared to life beneath him, loud enough to rattle the diner windows. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed home. But for the first time in 6 years, he didn't feel alone. 3 weeks went by, and Hank Bowen didn't come to Ruby's diner. Not the first Thursday, not the second, not the third. Della noticed. She stood behind the counter on the third Thursday night, watching the door like she expected him to walk through any minute. 8:40 came and went. 9 o'clock, 9:30. The booth in the back corner stayed empty. She told herself it was none of her business. Customers came and went. People changed their routines. Maybe Hank had found somewhere else to eat. Maybe he'd moved. Maybe he'd gotten sick. Maybe he just didn't want to sit alone anymore, ordering food for ghosts. But deep down, Della knew it was about the kids, about Wyatt and Ivy, and the night everything changed, about the second plate finally being eaten. Hank was home. His apartment sat above a motorcycle repair shop on the east side of Barstow. Small, 2 rooms and a bathroom, concrete floors, bare walls except for one framed photograph on the table beside his bed. The photograph showed a girl, 14 years old, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a soccer uniform, holding a trophy, smiling like she'd just conquered the world. Bryn, 6 years old in that photograph now. 6 years since Hank had seen that smile in person. He sat on the edge of his bed, the photograph in his hands, and asked the same question he had been asking for 3 weeks. What if Bryn had needed help and nobody was there? What if she'd been like Wyatt and Ivy, scared and running, and she'd asked someone for help and that someone had turned away? What if the reason she hadn't come back wasn't because she hated him, but because she'd needed him and he hadn't been there? The thought sat in his chest like a stone. For 6 years, Hank had told himself a story. Jennifer took Bryn. Jennifer cut off contact. Jennifer turned his daughter against him. It was Jennifer's fault, all of it. But sitting in that apartment with Wyatt's voice echoing in his head, "Why are you helping us?" Hank couldn't hide behind that story anymore. "Because I see myself in you." He'd said it to Wyatt, meant it, but there was more to it than that. He saw what he could have been if someone had helped him at 9 years old. If someone had sat across from him in a diner and said, "You're safe now, I've got you." But nobody had, and Danny had paid the price. Hank set the photograph back on the table. He stared at it for a long time, memorizing details he already knew by heart. The grass stains on Bryn's knees, the gap in her front teeth she'd been self-conscious about, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled just like her mother's. He'd lost her. Not because Jennifer took her, because he'd been too much of what scared people and not enough of what they needed. Too much leather and ink and violence. Not enough patience and presence and safety. He'd been a Hell's Angel, a good one, loyal to his brothers, dangerous to his enemies. But he'd never learned how to be the kind of father a 14-year-old girl needed. And by the time he figured that out, she was gone. Hank's phone rang. He almost didn't answer, didn't recognize the number, but something made him pick up. "Yeah, Hank, it's Marianne." He sat up straight. "Aren't there? Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she said. Her voice was warm, reassuring. "I wanted to give you an update about Wyatt and Ivy." Hank had been trying not to think about them, trying to tell himself he'd done his part and whatever happened next wasn't his responsibility. But he'd been failing at that pretty badly. "They okay?" he asked. "They're doing well," Marianne said. "Better than well, actually. We found their grandmother in Needles the next day. Rosa Brennan. Good woman. She'd been trying to reach her daughter for months, but Travis Cole had isolated Sarah. Cut her off from family. Classic abuser pattern. The boyfriend. Arrested the day after we got the kids out. Officers went to the house for a welfare check. Found Sarah with a broken wrist and bruising around her neck and shoulders. Travis was charged with felony domestic violence. He's being held without bail because of his priors." Hank felt something ease in his chest. And the mom, Sarah's in a domestic violence program. Good one. She's got a case manager, a restraining order, and she's in transitional housing with her mother's help. The kids were reunited with her 10 days ago. That fast? When the evidence is clear and there's family willing to step up, the system can actually work, Marianne said. Rosa moved down from Needles to help. They've got a new apartment. Sarah's got a job lined up. The kids are enrolled in school. Hank didn't say anything. Couldn't. There was something caught in his throat. Wyatt asked about you, Marianne said quietly. What did he say? He wanted to know if you were okay. Wanted to say thank you. Hank closed his eyes. Tell him he doesn't owe me anything. That's what I figured you'd say. Marianne paused. But for what it's worth, what you did that night mattered. You gave those kids a chance. You didn't look away. Most people would have. Most people aren't me. No, Marianne agreed. They're not. After she hung up, Hank sat in the silence of his apartment for a long time. The pattern had broken. Wyatt got help. Ivy was safe. Sarah was getting the support she needed. Travis Cole was behind bars. Different than Danny, different than Henderson, different than every other time Hank had watched someone he could have saved slip through his fingers. This time someone got out. This time the story ended differently. But Bryn was still gone. Hank looked at the photograph on his bedside table, at his daughter's smile, at the girl who'd been 14 the last time he saw her and would be 20 now. An adult, living a life somewhere that didn't include him. For 6 years he'd been passive, ordering a plate, keeping a seat empty, waiting for something that was never going to happen on its own. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. Hank picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in 5 years. Ray Kowalski, private investigator, former cop who'd left the force under circumstances nobody talked about and started doing work for people who couldn't go to the police. Hank had used him a few times back in his Hells Angels days, finding people who didn't want to be found, digging up information that wasn't supposed to exist. Ray was expensive. Ray was good. Ray didn't ask questions. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. Kowalski Investigations. Ray, it's Hank Bowen. A pause. Hank, long time. Need you to find someone. Who? My daughter, Bryn Bowen. Last known location was somewhere in Oregon. She was 14 6 years ago. She'd be 20 now. Mother took her. Yeah. Custody dispute. Something like that. Ray was quiet for a moment. Hank could hear him typing on a keyboard. This gonna turn into one of those situations where I find her and you show up with a bunch of bikers to drag her home? Ray asked. No, Hank said. I just need to know she's okay. That it? That's it. More typing. Then Ray said, standard missing person search runs about 3,000. Could be more if the trail's cold. I'll pay it. Give me 2 weeks, Ray said. I'll see what I can find. Hank gave him the details he had. Bryn's birth date, Jennifer's full name, the last address he had in Oregon. It wasn't much, but Ray had worked with less. When he hung up, Hank sat back on his bed and looked at the photograph again. He didn't know what he'd do if Ray actually found her. Didn't know what he'd say. Didn't know if she'd even want to hear from him. But for the first time in 6 years, he was doing something other than ordering a plate and hoping the universe would deliver a miracle. He was taking action, just like he'd done for Wyatt and Ivy. Maybe it was too late. Maybe Bryn had moved on and built a life that was better without him in it. But at least he'd know. At least he could stop wondering. 3 months later, Hank walked into Ruby's diner on a Thursday night. It had been almost 4 months since he'd sat in his booth. 4 months since Wyatt and Ivy. 4 months since everything changed. Delva looked up from behind the counter when the door opened. Her face broke into a smile. Well, look who finally decided to show up, she said. Hank nodded at her. Della, your booth's open. Thanks. He walked to the back corner and slid into the worn vinyl seat. The same seat he'd occupied every Thursday for 3 years before he'd stopped coming. The diner looked the same cracked stools at the counter, same jukebox that didn't work, same faded posters on the walls. But something felt different. Hank felt different. Della came over with a coffee pot and a menu. You eating tonight? She asked. Hank looked at the menu without really seeing it. Yeah, he said. Burger, fries. Just one plate. The question hung in the air between them. Hank set the menu down. 2, he said quietly. Grilled cheese with tomato. Same as before. Della's expression softened. She didn't ask any questions. Just wrote down the order and walked to the kitchen window. Hank sat back and looked at the empty seat across from him. For 3 years, he'd filled that seat with a ghost, with the memory of a daughter who wasn't coming back, with the hope that maybe if he kept the ritual going, somehow the universe would notice and bring her home. It hadn't worked. But he'd kept doing it anyway, because it was all he had. Ray Kowalski had called 2 weeks ago with an address, Portland, Oregon, an apartment near Portland State University. Bryn was a student there, studying social work of all things. She had a part-time job at a coffee shop. She was alive. She was safe. She was building a life. Ray had offered to dig deeper, find out more, see if there was a boyfriend, what her grades were, who her friends were. Hank had told him to stop. Knowing she was okay was enough. Ray had asked if Hank wanted him to make contact, feel her out, see if she'd be willing to talk. Hank had said no, because the truth was he didn't know what he'd say to her. Sorry I scared you. Sorry I wasn't the father you needed. Sorry I spent 6 years ordering a plate of food instead of fighting harder to find you. None of it seemed like enough. So he'd paid Ray and filed the address away and tried to figure out what came next. And then Ray had called back 3 days ago. She knows, he'd said. Knows what? About you looking for her, about the plate, about what you did for those kids in Barstow. Hank's blood had gone cold. How Marianne, the social worker who helped the kids, turns out she knows people in Portland. Made some calls, found out Bryn was up there, reached out to her. Why would she do that? Because she thinks Bryn should know the truth about her father, about the kind of man you really are. Hank had hung up without saying anything else. Now he sat in the booth waiting for food he probably wouldn't eat and wondered if he'd made a mistake coming back here. The door opened. Hank didn't look up. Della would seat whoever it was. It wasn't his business. But he heard footsteps, coming toward the back of the diner, coming toward his booth. He looked up. A young woman stood at the edge of the table, early 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a jacket that was too big for her sleeves rolled up at the wrists. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder. She was looking at him with an expression Hank couldn't quite read. And then he saw it. The way she tilted her head when she was uncertain about something. The small scar on her left eyebrow from falling off her bicycle when she was 6. The gap in her front teeth that wasn't a gap anymore because she'd gotten braces sometime in the last 6 years. Bryn, his voice came out rough, barely there. She nodded, her eyes were shining. Not quite crying, not quite not. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Bryn slid into the seat across from him. The seat that had been empty for 3 years, the seat he'd kept waiting. She set her backpack on the floor and folded her hands on the table. "The private investigator you hired found me," she said. Her voice was steadier than Hank expected. "He didn't say much, just asked if I'd be willing to talk. I said no." Hank nodded. He'd expected that. "But then a woman named Marianne called me," Bryn continued. "She said she was a social worker, retired. She told me about 2 kids who came into a diner in Barstow 3 months ago, about a man who helped them, who kept them safe, who made sure they got out of a bad situation." Hank's jaw tightened. "She told me about the second plate," Bryn said. Her voice cracked on that last word. "About how you've been coming here every Thursday. About how you order 2 meals, one for yourself, one for—" She couldn't finish. Hank looked down at the table. "One for you," he said quietly, "for 6 years. 3, Hank said. Took me 3 years after you left to accept that you weren't coming back. The first 3 years I was still looking, still trying, still hoping. Then I gave up on finding you and started, I don't know, started trying to keep you in my life the only way I knew how." Bryn pressed her fingers against her eyes. When she lowered them, there were tears on her cheeks. "Mom told me things about you," she said. "About the club, about the things you did, about the kind of man you were. I believed her. I was 14. I believed everything she said." "She wasn't lying," Hank said. "I was that man, am that man. I've done things I'm not proud of, things I can't take back. But Mary Ann saw one night, Hank interrupted. One good thing I did, that doesn't erase the rest of it. It matters though, doesn't it? Bryn's voice was stronger now. What you did for those kids. You didn't have to help them. Nobody would have blamed you if you just called the cops and walked away. But you didn't. You sat with them. You listened. You made sure they were safe. They reminded me of someone. Who? Me, Hank said, when I was 9 years old, running from a house where my dad used his fists more than his words. I grabbed my little brother and we ran. Nobody helped us. Nobody kept us safe. We got sent back and nothing changed. My brother didn't make it. Drugs. Dead at 23. Bryn's eyes widened. I didn't know you had a brother. Danny, I don't talk about him much. Because it hurts. Because I failed him, Hank said. I ran and I left him behind and he didn't survive it. When I saw those kids in the diner, Wyatt protecting his little sister, I saw me and Danny, and I thought, maybe I can do it right this time. Bryn was quiet for a long moment. Mary Ann showed me the lawyer bills, she said, from when you were trying to find me. 3 different attorneys. Receipts from motels in Oregon. Letters you wrote that Mom never gave me. She was protecting you. From what? From me, Hank said. From the life I lived. From the danger that comes with being connected to a man like me. She did what she thought was right. Were you really that dangerous? Hank looked her in the eye. Yeah, I was. And now, I'm older, slower, trying to be better. Don't know if I'll ever get there. Bryn looked at the table, at the spot where Della would bring the second plate in a few minutes. Is that really for me? She asked quietly. After all this time, Hank felt something crack open in his chest. Every Thursday, he said, his voice was rough. 3 years now. Why? Because it's the only way I knew how to keep you in my life when you weren't here. Because giving up on that plate felt like giving up on you. And I couldn't do that. Even if you never came back, even if you hated me, I couldn't give up. Bryn's tears fell freely now. I didn't hate you, she said. I was scared and confused. And Mom made it sound like you were this terrible person who would hurt us if we stayed. But I never hated you. You had every right to. But I didn't. Della appeared at the edge of the booth with 2 plates. A burger with fries for Hank, a grilled cheese with tomato for Bryn. She set them down without a word, looked at Hank, looked at Bryn, then she walked away with tears in her own eyes. Bryn stared at the plate. Hank pushed it across the table toward her. It's yours, he said. Bryn picked up half of the sandwich. She took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. It's exactly how I remember it, she said. For the first time in 6 years, Hank Bowen was not eating alone. They didn't talk much while they ate. There was too much to say and not enough words to share it with. 6 years of silence doesn't break with a single conversation. But it was a start. Bryn told him about college, about her major, about the coffee shop where she worked, about her roommate who drove her crazy, but who she loved anyway. Hank listened, asked questions, tried not to stare at her like she might disappear if he looked away. When they finished eating, Bryn reached across the table and put her hand on top of his. I'm not saying everything's okay, she said. I'm not saying we just pick up where we left off. There's a lot we need to talk about, a lot I need to understand. I know, Hank said, but I'm here, Bryn said, and I want to try. So do I, to him. She smiled, the same gap-toothed smile from the photograph, except the gap was gone now, and she was 20 instead of 14, and everything was different. But she was here, and that was enough. Della came by with the check. Hank paid, left a tip that was probably twice what the meal cost. When they walked to the door, Bryn stopped. Can I ask you something, she said. Anything. Those kids, Wyatt and Ivy, what happened to them? They're safe, Hank said, with their mom and their grandmother. Boyfriend's in jail. They're doing okay. Good, Bryn said. Then quieter. Did you think about me when you were helping them? Yeah, Hank said. I thought, what if you'd needed help and nobody was there? What if you'd been scared and running and the person you asked turned away? I did need help, Bryn said. I needed help understanding who my father really was, not the story Mom told me, the real you. And I didn't have that for 6 years, but I have it now. They stood in the parking lot under the buzzing neon sign. Bryn's car was parked a few spaces down from Hank's bike. I should go, she said. I've got an early class tomorrow. You drove down from Portland just for this? Marianne told me you'd be here Thursday night. I figured, if you were still ordering that plate after all this time, maybe you were worth giving a chance. Hank didn't trust himself to speak. Bryn stepped forward and hugged him. It was awkward, tentative. Neither of them quite sure how to hold the other after 6 years of absence. But it was real. When she pulled back, she was crying again. I'll call you, she said. Okay. I mean it. I'll call. I'll answer. She got in her car and drove away. Hank stood in the parking lot for a long time after she left. The night was cold, clear, the kind of desert night where you could see every star. He thought about Wyatt and Ivy safe with their mother. Thought about Danny dead at 23. Thought about Bryn driving north on a highway back to Portland. Thought about the second plate finally eaten. Patterns could break. Stories could end differently. Not always. Not for everyone. But sometimes. If you were lucky. If you didn't give up. 6 weeks later, Hank was back at Ruby's on a Thursday night. Same booth, same 2 plates. But this time someone was sitting across from him. Bryn had driven down from Portland. She did that now every other week or so. They'd talk, eat dinner, try to rebuild something that had been broken for too long. It was slow, hard. Some conversations ended with her crying. Some ended with him having to walk away because he didn't know how to say what he needed to say. But they kept trying. Della brought their food, set it down with a smile that said she knew exactly what this meant. Hank was halfway through his burger when the door opened. He looked up. A teenager walked in, tall, lean, wearing a baseball uniform with dirt on the knees. Behind him, a younger girl, 13, maybe 14, carrying a backpack. Hank recognized them instantly. Wyatt and Ivy. Wyatt saw Hank and his face broke into a grin. He walked straight to the booth. Ivy followed, less shy than she'd been 3 months ago, but still keeping close to her brother. Hank, Wyatt said, thought we might find you here. Hank stood up. Wyatt held out his hand and Hank shook it. Not a kid's handshake, a man's handshake. Firm, steady. You're taller, Hank said. Yeah, growing like a weed, Mom says. Wyatt looked at Bryn. Who's this? This is my daughter, Hank said. Bryn. Bryn smiled and shook Wyatt's hand, then Ivy's. Dad told me about you two, she said. Wyatt looked at Hank. Dad. Hank's throat tightened. Bryn had started calling him that a few weeks ago. Not every time, just sometimes, when it felt right. It still caught him off guard every time he heard it. Yeah, Bryn said. He's my dad. Wyatt grinned. Good for you, man. Della appeared with menus. You kids eating? If that's okay, Wyatt said, looking at Hank. Hank nodded. Sit. There wasn't room in the booth, so Della pulled over chairs from a nearby table. Wyatt and Ivy sat down, ordered burgers and fries and milkshakes. For the next hour, they talked. Wyatt told them about baseball, about making varsity as a sophomore, about the scholarship offers he was starting to get from colleges. Ivy talked about wanting to be a veterinarian, about the stray cat she'd found and convinced her mom to let her keep. Bryn told them about her classes, about the internship she'd gotten with a domestic violence advocacy group in Portland. Hank mostly listened. He watched these kids who'd walked into a diner 6 months ago, scared and hungry and desperate now, sitting at a table with full plates and bright futures and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're safe. He watched his daughter, who'd been gone for 6 years now, sitting beside him like she'd never left. The booth wasn't big enough for all of them, but they made it work. Della came by to refill drinks. She looked at the crowded table at Hank surrounded by people and she smiled. "Looks like you're gonna need a bigger booth," she said. When the meal was over and the bill was paid, they all walked out to the parking lot together. Wyatt shook Hank's hand again. "Thanks for everything, man, for real." "You did the hard part," Hank said. "Maybe, but you were there when it mattered." Ivy hugged Hank, quick, shy but real. They got in their car, a beat-up Toyota that Rosa had bought for Sarah, and drove off. Bryn leaned against her car looking at Hank. "You did good," she said. "I just bought them dinner." "You did more than that," Bryn said. "You showed up, you stayed, you didn't look away. That's what kids need, what everyone needs." Hank looked at the diner, at the buzzing neon sign, at the booth visible through the window where he'd sat alone for 3 years, ordering food for a ghost. "I spent a long time thinking that second plate was about keeping you alive in my life," he said. "But I think it was really about keeping myself alive until you could come back. And I did come back." "Yeah," Hank said, "you did." Bryn hugged him, tighter than before, like she meant it. "See you in 2 weeks, she asked. "I'll be here." She got in her car and drove away. Hank stood in the parking lot under the stars. The second plate didn't sit empty anymore. Hadn't for a while now. And standing there in the cold desert night, surrounded by the ghosts of who he'd been and the hope of who he might still become, Hank Bowen realized something. Some people walk into your life for 60 seconds and change everything. And sometimes the person everyone was afraid of turns out to be the one who was most afraid of being alone. He'd ordered a second plate for 3 years. And one night someone finally sat down to eat it. Then another night someone else sat down. And another. The plate wasn't about Bryn. It was never about Bryn. It was about learning to keep space for people, to stay present, to not give up on the idea that someday the empty seat wouldn't be empty anymore. Hank straddled his bike, started the engine. The Harley roared to life beneath him. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed home. But he wasn't alone anymore, and he wouldn't be again.